Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. In today's episode, we have Peter Kelly with us. Peter is a Hermetic practitioner and a mystic, and we're going to be talking about his work, also in relation to psychedelic integration. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Clara. Thanks for having us on. Appreciate it. Good to catch up in person.
Yeah, really good to have you here. So let's start with your personal story, in the same way as I do with all my guests. Tell us a little bit more about what took you to this path and how you developed into this line of work.
Yeah, so coming to this work is just I think just that life of suffering and misery, I think the catalyst for a lot of people who kind of come to this work. Yeah, just a really heavy, dark life, lots of struggle within it. And I think I kind of came to this work, I suppose, sitting in space, for one thing, sacred space with people. I'd say maybe in my mid 30s, I think. So maybe about maybe 8 or 9 years ago. And that was, I suppose, how I got my first taste of the work. But for me, the approach that I have with the work comes from an interest that I've had since very, very young childhood. So the kind of, I suppose, that mystic side or the hermetic or that kind of the ancient mystery school type wisdom is something I was always interested in. So I think from about the age of 5 or 6, I got this spark with Egypt. Something clicked with me with Egypt when I was very young, and I just started kind of following. Like obviously, it was an interest at that age, but I've been kind of studying it with that interest my entire life. And then obviously, with coming to this work, obviously come to the work with my own issues to be working on first, and obviously continue to do so. But as I kind of going through the process of healing, all that information as to why I was interested in it just came and linked all together, and it became kind of unison. So then I've also progressed that into the way that I work now and the work I offer other people. So it's that sacred and the ancient wisdom with going into like symbols and the wisdom of the mystery schools, and that's my approach to the work and how I read the conscious fields for like integrating people and for helping people.
Okay, yeah, you're talking about reading the conscious field and connecting to the subconscious as well. And I know a lot of your work revolves around that, around learning how to connect to the subconscious to get useful information and then how to be able to decode that information and then use it to create meaningful changes in your life. So on those lines, I'd like to ask you, what could be one of the processes that can be used or that you use with people? And I know the way you work is very personalized and it really depends on the person. But if you were to think about it, what could be one process that could help with that?
Yeah, like, I suppose like again, as you said, like because of the way I read the conscious fields, which is in a symbolic expression. So each person, because each person has a particular individual field of consciousness that resonates to their individual field. So the outer consciousness is always because we're merging, because we're part of it. So it's always kind of about each individual person, but obviously that varies. If I'm working in a one-to-one situation, it's just going to be very direct, personal. If it's in a ceremony space with a group, it's still the same, but it's a little bit different because obviously you're going to draw in a similar field of people because when I work, I'll put a strong intention as to what I'm drawing in consciously always. But I'll kind of work with the individual level, even in the group setting, and then merge it into the group energy, if that makes sense. But like one of the main things is deciphering the symbolism of what we consider the physical or the material plane, which is our kind of day-to-day reality that most people are kind of attuned to with the five senses. And just deciphering that. So basically what people's events, what's happening. So if somebody comes to work with me, whether it's in an individual one-to-one space or if it's in a ceremony space, so when I'm going to each person to kind of check in with them to see what's going on with them, I'll invite them to speak straight away. And because what they're going to speak to me, I'm already seeing the different planes of consciousness by the words that they'll use, the events that they describe. And then I'm transferring those events symbolically to what the conscious expression manifests those physical events from. So we're really kind of going beyond the material plane to see what's happening behind in the other conscious planes, just by the events that will happen, because everything is symbolic. So I can kind of trace it back then to exactly what's going on for that person in the higher planes, we'll say. So initially, I give them an explanation about consciousness. I'd simplify consciousness first of all. And I always, as a simplified way, I always bring in the Kabbalistic tree of life. And the reason I bring this in because it's a very simple way to understand it. And so this is the material plane at the bottom. This is just one expression of consciousness. There's many like diagrams or modalities that we can use. And so this is the physical plane, which everybody's kind of aware of, and most people are really just basing their life off that. So just to give them an explanation that this is the accumulation of all planes of consciousness in one. But so oftentimes people are only attuned to just that. I mean, we're existent in all planes of consciousness, but just to explain that there's obviously a lot more goes on back up here, which creates the physical reality. So the physical reality is just an illusion based on what's happening in the other planes of consciousness. So when we have imbalances up here, that's why certain events happen down here in the physical plane. So just giving them an explanation that, first of all, that what's happening in your day-to-day reality is information to decipher what's out of balance in your system. And once you kind of reverse that back, like what we talk about in this case, just on the Kabbalistic tree of life, is we kind of work the physical plane backwards up into divinity here to see what's actually coming down here. Because the physical events that happen to people or whatever's going on in their life, the difficulties that they might be facing, is symbolically showing us what's out of balance in the other conscious planes. So just to give them a baseline, a simple understanding so that they, that you're not going to lose them. And for me, it's all about creating a kind of a safe understanding of what's going on, because that's where people get stuck, is when they don't understand what's going on, that generates fear. And then, different aspects are going to show up in that fear, like your wounds or previous events or traumatic experiences. So just to get them that solid foundation beneath the feet first, to say this is exactly what reality is, and to keep it simple, not to kind of blow their heads too much and go into too much depth. But once you kind of go into that, then you can see that the pieces will start to settle with them. And then you can explain to them as you're going through, if they're talking about what's going on with you, or why have you come to a session, just as an example, or, why are you in this space for, what's your intention to heal, or what's the issue? And then I can take them with the issue. I can explain it back through the mirror symbolically of what's actually showing up on this material plane by what's out of balance up here.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation. And then, yeah, like you were saying, that's just one of the models of one model to look at the psyche, basically, and makes me think about psychosynthesis, which is this transpersonal psychology that I use for integration with people, with clients. And there's something called the psychosynthesis egg that actually really reminds me of the Kabbalah tree that you just showed me, where you have these different levels of the psyche, like the lower unconscious, middle unconscious, upper unconscious, and then you got the super conscious and all the collective conscious around. And it really makes you think about how, you can travel through these different layers. So it's really nice to just see the parallels between these different models and really ancient models like the Kabbalah tree and psychosynthesis, which is fairly recent.
Yeah, and I mean that's the one thing I find, like with like, obviously being a mystic, it's it's you follow the path of mystics that have been throughout time, going back like for tens of thousands of years. And these are just modalities that have been created by mystics who traverse the different planes of consciousness and come back to share it with humanity, so as to uplift humanity, to use it for that way. And you go to different cultures and they use different modalities, but once you kind of start to attune into those planes of consciousness, you just start to recognize everything is just the one thing. And the more modalities that you can actually study or look at, deepen your understanding of the other ones that because they all work off each other to give a much wider and much richer perspective of what it is.
Yeah, and yeah, now kind of relating it back to plant medicine and the work with plant medicine. That's the thing that I see psychedelic medicine as a connection tool, basically, that allows you to see these different layers of consciousness a little bit more clearly, and even if you don't understand them straight away, it allows you to travel through them in a way that maybe you were not able to do before. And that's the kind of, one of the benefits that I see through the work with plant medicine is to be able to do that. It initiates a process where you really start peeling off the layers and realizing, there's so much more to reality than I was aware of before. And there's much more to me and my inner world that I was aware of. And you get to experience even just for a moment, the richness of your inner world and all these kind of potentials and possibilities that reside within you. And so that's how I look at it. And, plant medicine and integration. And to me as well, then again, integration becomes that the backbone of what you do with plant medicine. So I look at plant medicine as the connection tool that connects you to something that's inside of you. And then integration is the ongoing process that allows you to kind of peel off more and more layers. And so, regardless of what kind of experience you've had, it could be plant medicine, it could be breath work, just a transformative experience, then that's the work, is to carry on bringing that forward afterwards. And so that's kind of like the work is ongoing. And I don't even know if the word work is the right word. I would call it like a process of self-discovery that carries on. Once that you open that door, that carries on continuously. So that's why actually having these models to look at it and work with the psyche as well, and look at the psyche, that they're so useful because they can really support you in that process of carrying on with that self-discovery as well. So that's how I see plant medicine, as a, something that you could be using once in a while to um, dive deeper and then come back on as a top up, really, but not as the main tool. The main tool is you and is within yourself. And I'd like to know what you think about it, what you think about how you look at plant medicine.
Yeah, exactly that. Like it again, like with all respect to the medicines, like it is a tool to help us on the path, and exactly as you said about like the consciousness. And I've actually had a theory that I've been kind of coming to me over the last maybe couple of months about plant medicine is because if we go into like so my understanding through the occult studies, which gives us an understanding of the evolution of humanity when we come through the we've evolved from mineral into the vegetable kingdom or plant kingdom into the animal kingdom, and then we're into the human kingdom, and now the next stage of evolution is like what's considered superhuman, we'll say, which is the more advanced sensitivity of the human to reach further. But and when you take it from just that perspective as well, one thing I see is each time we upgrade into a new um, evolutionary stage, we'll say, obviously we get more what we, I suppose, call personal free will. And so it's part of the evolution that the more free will that we have, the more work it is to balance it so that we can, center ourselves, which is part of the evolution stage. And so for me, one aspect that's just coming to me lately about plant medicines is, when you go back to the plant kingdom, if you go back to that state of consciousness, it's a much purified consciousness, really. And so I really feel that the consciousness of the plants bring us a much more centered and purified version of reality without the messiness or the noise of the free will that we have as humans. And then they're able to bring that through to us. And obviously, from you're talking about planes of consciousness, it comes through very, very symbolic or visual, like the experience that we have. But that's one thing that I do see, is I just see that it cuts out a lot of the noise. So when we have those experiences, it brings us directly. And obviously, what we need then is just to be able to give a little bit of a fine tune to the antenna to be able to read and decipher those symbols in what it feels like to be in a human life.
Yeah.
So it's very, very clean and very, very pure in where it takes us. It just really takes us exactly where we need to be.
Totally. And then the challenge afterwards is to be able to reconnect to that clarity, to that sense of expansion without the medicine, and that's why I think the integration is really useful and it's really important, because it allows you to create that possibility to be able to do that, tap back into that clarity, that inner knowing. And like I was saying earlier, plant medicine being a connection tool, it only really connects you, like I was saying earlier on, to something that's already inside of you. There's already a wisdom that's available, and that's really what the medicine does, in my view, anyway. Not to again diminish the medicine and the spirits of the plants and of the planet as well, that are helping us through that process. But what's really empowering is for people to then realize, oh, that's already inside. It's only connecting me to something that's already inside of me. And actually thinking about that, that brings me to symbols and imagery, because there's a lot of that that's already embedded in our DNA as well. But then we have all our personal way of decoding that, interpreting that, and integrating that too. So I'd like to ask you, what was one way that worked for you? I'm going to ask about your personal experience, because that's the easiest thing to do, rather than, how you're supporting others in this, because it's so individual and subjective. But if you think back about a plant medicine experience that you've had, and talking about imagery and symbols, especially, so maybe talking about a vision that you had with plant medicine, or I don't know, shamanic journey, but what has been a process that's been helpful for you? Like, how did you integrate, say, for example, like a symbol that you saw or an image in a way that has really helped you, like, deeply in your own process, has really helped you shifting your mindset and creating kind of like a space for something new from an image?
Yeah, and I suppose I should declare here like that for me with plant medicines, especially like I worked with ayahuasca for a good few years. It's the whole space with ayahuasca, but I don't really get visuals when I take a. For me, it's always a feeling in the body. But
Okay.
I have obviously at the odd times I do get some visuals, but for me, I obviously shamanic journey is a practice I work with a lot, or I have worked with a lot. And I obviously more visual with the shamanic journey than I am with the medicine, which is, I suppose, it could be maybe strange for some people to hear that, but yeah, and like I think, like I was saying earlier about like my interest, my whole life has always been, since very very young, has always been the mythology and the ancient cultures, and it's been the mystery schools, so I was always drawn to it. And so my natural kind of affinity through my life has developed an understanding of symbols anyway, just through those interests. And as I said, it was medicine myself of like that kind of brought that all together and connected it to make sense of it in my actual reality as a tool for to progress, we'll say. And so I kind of almost had that wisdom. I wasn't aware that I had it exactly as the way I had it, but it was always there. And so I think it was probably shamanic journey where I kind of really realized that, oh, hey, this is something that actually works with that I can actually apply to myself, or we'd say as a tool, or as a deciphering mechanism to understand myself and to further myself. So I've had like quite a few experiences with kind of symbolically like that way, we'll say, with different journeys of information coming through. And I just correlated straight away by how it feels to be able to kind of decipher what it means. I mean, there's been so many events, like nearly every single event of my life in this work and expansion has always been down to something symbolic, we'll say. But even just sometimes it could be something simple. Because even when I did shamanic journey first, I was convinced I couldn't get it, that I used to really get too many images. And then sometimes I just have it, like I think some of my first journeys were really, maybe only one or two images came through, which is sometimes is even simpler to decipher, if there's less going on, we'll say. But just something really simple and profound. And I think like when we're talking about deciphering of symbols, we have to be kind of conscious of the fact that there's three intelligence for me, main ones that go on. And the first is obviously it's the information of the symbol itself, so visual. So like, what is the symbol? Okay, it is X, Y, or Z. So that's like the mind. That's the information. But then for me, that merges with the how it feels in the body, which is the second intelligence. And when they merge together, that then creates the third intelligence, which me is like, which I would consider almost gnosis. And so for me, like when it happens to me, like where I have those kind of profound experience, it could be just any kind of a symbol. Like I remember there was one time I had a symbol of a crab, when it was in a certain direction in a shamanic journey, and it was in my south. And for me, the south is all about water and emotions, and the crab was there, and it was just this aha moment about this, the protective layer of my life, we'll say, before I started to come to this work, and the hard shell to protect that vulnerability that was inside. And I know we're only just talking in words here, but ourselves when we have these experiences, it's much more than words on the surface. They open up to these really deep, symbolic, and conscious experiences. But just something simple and profound as that to get an understanding of myself, about me and my emotions, the way I was most of my life, which they were completely blocked, as a survival mechanism, obviously for my life. But just that simple expression of a crab in that certain place on the wheel, I was doing the medicine wheel. So I was drawn into a specific area, basically, which was to do with emotions. And then that crowd would just open up the fact of letting me see myself almost from outside of myself, to the representation of a symbol in relation to the piece that I was actually looking for that information, to understand myself better. But it's just aspects like that when we connect, I like to call it when we connect with a symbol. when we connect with a symbol is when the symbol can speak to us, and that's when we get the feeling, the sensation in the body.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I was thinking about what you were saying, that when you take medicine now, you feel more than you see. So actually, it's quite similar for me too, where I probably see more when I do shamanic journeying with the drum than when I take medicine now. So at the beginning, when I used to take, especially with grandmother Aya, I used to have quite a lot of visions at the beginning when I first started. It's been kind of 9 years now almost of taking plant medicine. And that's really evolved in time. And now I actually get very little visuals, maybe a little bit of visuals, and then the feeling. And then it kind of almost goes into that state of gnosis that you were talking about, where it just translates into a message pretty quickly or into some kind of knowing, even if it's not in words, you know. So, and that's actually, I think, is one of the most important things, is about not so much what you've seen, but what was your emotional response to what you saw, whether the symbol, the image. That's actually what I focus on with when I'm doing integration with people, because I asked them, how did you feel? And really kind of expanding on that, because it's very easy to get caught up in the story and in the visuals that you've had. But actually, what really is most important, I find, in integration is what was your emotional response to it? Because then you are there. How can what you saw support you emotionally and in your growth and your transformation? Just bringing it back to really like a more of a sense of, how's that useful for you right now, and not get caught into that in that story of that image.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point as well about that, because people do get distracted by information a lot, and then they forget that you need to balance that with how it feels like, you know.
Exactly, like their own response to it, because it's almost like when, I mean, it makes me think about what Gabor Mate says about trauma and how trauma affects people. That it's not so much what's happened, but that defines how that person is going to be affected, but is their response, their emotional response to it. And in some ways, it's similar to what you see in a medicine journey. It is, yes, what you saw is symbolic, but what was again, your response to it? And that's what really counts. That's what's really going to um, affect and define, what comes after for you. And the way you respond is a mixture of so many different things, or where you're at in your life, what you brought with you from the past, intergenerational um baggage, if you want to call it that as well. So it's much more complex than just, what you saw and what you potentially could mean, but it's that really going into that emotional response. And another thing that makes me think about is also like that connection between brain and heart as well. It's important to have. So what you saw and how you felt. And then the rest of the body, it makes me think about the guts as well. It's like the second brain, and all the rest of the body, all the other sensations, so that you can get into that, again, state of almost sense of gnosis that you were talking about. So, and another thing that actually I thought is really important to kind of to talk about, that you mentioned earlier at the very beginning when you were showing the Kabbalah card, is the sense of safety as well. To be able to explore something, there needs to be safety there, and needs to feel safe enough to do that. So earlier on, when you were looking at, pointing at the 3D on the bottom of the card, and then you were saying, yeah, that really kind of, it's about discovering the connection to the deeper meaning that has in the higher realms. And then you also mentioned about safety, and how to kind of, it's important to create safety so that someone can potentially look at something that might be challenging and still feel supported and strong enough to do so. So I'm wondering how you support people in that process of feeling safe.
Yeah, I think like, I mean, like, exactly. I mean, it's safety, because I mean, when you think about like obviously sacred space, and people are coming to people are coming into sacred space to go to a place within themselves that they're not really normally going to be going to in their day-to-day lives. Especially if people are just coming into space who don't kind of work in the field anyway. And like, you obviously, I mean, one thing is you can always mirror your own experience of when, like that's one thing I've always been aware of is when I was in sacred space and when I was coming to the workforce, and what way was I, and just kind of the the analysis I do on myself basically is to kind of transfer that into the experience I want to create for other people. And for me, one of the big things is obviously to feel safe, to, you know, that you need to be able to trust the space. You need to be able to, you know, it's a lot to do with the energy of the person. Obviously, of course, it's going to hold the space and where they're at. And but I think one of the main things is to give an understanding, a little bit of an understanding to as much as what you can to somebody, because what creates blockages in people mostly is fear, and fear comes from a lack of understanding. And so obviously with the experience of doing your own work, you're able to, you know, you know what people are going to be going through, you know, psychologically and emotionally, you know, even not even in the experience itself, but even the preparation and the stepping into a space. So for me, it's always about like knowing that and then doing something to address it basically straight away. You know, so you'd always pick up the energy. Somebody might come into a space who's a lot more nervous than somebody else, and you know, you give them a little bit of extra attention just because, you know, you'll know exactly what they need, and you know, to just to talk them into, you know, give them a little bit of an idea of what you're going to experience. And what I always do as well is I'd always give people like tips on how to navigate when it does get difficult, you know, because it's, you know, we all go through it. We all go through those difficult points, and just having the simple tools like the breath and, you know, just to kind of steady yourself at times. And the other one I always say as well, most importantly, is for people to put up their hand and ask for help. It's one of the most difficult things for people, is because it's that, you know, it's the life that we've lived, you know, through our wounds, I suppose, is, you know, we feel that we can't show weakness, which, you know, is a false. It's not really weak at all. It's just how we're wired. And so a lot of the time people will, you know, and I know this actually quite well from my own experience sitting in spaces when I came first, is, you know, I wouldn't ask for help. I'd sit there and I'd suffer throughout the night, like until I kind of got, you know, a bit better, we'll say. And so I apply that to other people, is that, look, when you know, in the psychology, when stuff comes up, how people are wired from the external world and from conformity and conditioning, you know, people think that if I ask for help, I'm showing a sign of weakness. And even though they're in a sacred space, you know, that carries in there sometimes. And I think just to address that as well, and just to make sure that people know that, you know, you're not going to be the only one maybe feels, you know, fear, or, you know, that you're worried about something coming up, that everybody else in this space feels the exact same way. You know, people might not say it on the surface, and just to kind of bring everybody back into that unity, that we're all in the one level. Every single one of us here is at the one level. And, you know, just whatever it takes for any individual person to feel safe and to feel secure. As I said, some people might need a little bit more care and attention than others, because of the piece basically showing themselves, you know, at that particular time. But yeah, so I think just, and obviously just being aware, I think is the main thing, being aware in a space of, you know, when somebody is going through something, or, you know, seeing the little dynamics that play out in the spaces as well, because, you know, this person could have something that's going to be activated by that person. And, you know, so you can see that certain people might be, because I'd see this from the conscious fields, could be playing out a polarity of each other, you know, so something could activate somebody else. And, you know, just being mindful of all those different energies that move in the space, so that you're aware of it all, and be able to catch it before somebody maybe spirals into fear.
Yeah, and then something else now that I was thinking about, you mentioned earlier mental noise, which is something that I think I read about on your website as well. And so now thinking about integration and transformative experiences, it doesn't have to be psilocybin or ayahuasca or plant medicine. It could be about any transformative ceremony or experience someone's had. So when integrating that afterwards, um, we talked about connecting to the subconscious and kind of learning to decode those messages from the subconscious for our own integration. Now, there can also be a lot of mental chatter or mental noise, like you mentioned, that usually comes from our past conditioning, from our self-talk that's been there for years, or patterns that have been there for years. So I'm wondering what could be some ways of distinguishing between the two when while doing our integration, or trying to really extract useful information so that we know that we're extracting information from a supportive source, and from subconscious messages that are there to support. How do we distinguish between those and the messages and the information that comes from our preconditioned patterns that have been there for a very long time?
Well, I suppose, like, I think for me, it's like it's always the activation, you know. So like if we're triggered or activated, if if you feel off center, then for me there's something out of balance that's showing itself in the system. So that's the one thing I'd always kind of recognize. And obviously people are used to kind of, I suppose, that term of being triggered. Something activates me and makes me angry, or upsets me, or it does something to take me from my center. Well, straight away for me, I recognize that is okay. I'm going to go into a little bit here. So in Hermeticism, with the laws, which is how we understand how the universe works, how consciousness works, because everything is conscious. And one of those sacred laws is the law of polarity. And so what happens is our conscious field or energetic field, which every single individual has, and also everything else is conscious as well. So if you can imagine that we're resonating out this energetic field, and in that energetic field is everything that's in us, so including balance and imbalance. And so if something is balanced, we're not really going to notice, because we're going to attract in the same balance externally by our balance in any particular area. And so that's just going to be smooth. We're not going to feel anything. But if I attract something that makes me feel a little bit off center or spiky, well, then I know that I have an equal but opposite in my system that's been triggered. So it's always the law of polarity. So if something triggers me, and like for example, we'll just say responsibility. If you have a responsibility pro or something that's ingrained in you from a wound, we'll say in childhood or whatever, and you take on a lot more responsibility. Maybe a parent wasn't able to be present, or for whatever. There's many different reasons. Their parents have their wounds that couldn't show up as well. There's we understand this, but you could carry a wound like that. So for example, then I might take on extra responsibility. That's the wound I have. So the activation for me will be the equal but opposite. I will attract in somebody who takes no responsibility, we'll say, and puts that on me. So they're in the plus side and I'm in the minus side. And each side is detrimental, because any imbalance is an imbalance. So that for me is one of the main ways that I'll kind of decipher something that's for me. And obviously getting that activation, you move out then. You don't stay, because then you'll get entangled. And then you'll start going into information in somebody else's conscious field that's actually not relative to you. So that's one of the aspects how I'd always kind of tell if it's something around a wound. And I suppose if on more the positive side of things, or something that's maybe like what I call a breadcrumb, something that's maybe leading us, forward on the path. For me, that just comes back to the sensation again. It's not so much of a trigger or an activation that kind of pulls me from my center, but again, it's the information of the symbol to how it feels, and I just like, again, it's very hard to put these things into words, but it's something that just activates. I like to describe it as like the divinity is in a straight line. It just merges, and it just really centered that the the information of the symbol through the mind and how it feels, just feels something. Oh, there's definitely something in this. And that could be anything. It could be something leading you to the next place you need to go, or maybe somebody the same book gets mentioned to you something like maybe 2 or 3 times, in a short space of time, maybe over a week or two. And I say, okay, why is that book being mentioned to me? Like, there's nothing really negatively activated in that, but for me, that's something more positive. That, okay, maybe I need to check out that book, just as an example. And then if I open that book, I guarantee I'll find a nugget in that book, or even maybe just one page of that book, that will just help me integrate maybe something else that's massively going on in my system at that time. So for me, that's kind of the difference I'd see with using, you know, the activations or the symbolic interactions, whether it's a positive or a negative. And like, they're all positive, because they're all giving us information to get us further in that path anyway.
Yeah, yeah, and I really like what you said there. That also emotions, there are not positive or negative emotions. They're just emotions that have information within them. And I like the way you brought it back to the body as well, to the sensations, and you know, in order to identify if something is useful or not. And makes me think, I guess it just comes from this sensation of either expansion of contraction in the body. It could be as simple as that. That could be the barometer to tell whether, a message that came through is something that you should pay attention to and follow and pursue and listen to, or not. It could be just as simple as that, just using the body sensation to guide you, really.
Yeah, and it is like, I mean, another thing as well is I think sometimes, the breath can be really important sometimes when something comes at us and maybe, maybe knocks us from our center a little bit, because as I said, there is a lot of noise that's in the mind. There's a lot of noise up there. And I think sometimes, just as an example, if somebody gets activated and somebody maybe gets knocked from their center, it's always good to maybe just kind of symbolically kind of even take a step or three back and just kind of connect with the breath and like, okay, where am I in this? Because sometimes when we get an activation, because we're going into survival mode, the system is so clever, it just puts us into survival mode because it's recognizing an energy that maybe was harmful to us in the past or something that maybe didn't, wasn't a nice experience. And so the system doesn't really follow the rules of time because time is a man-made creation, but so it doesn't realize that you're not in the same place anymore, that you're maybe more mature and that you could deal with it now. And so what happens is that activation really stirs the system, and it can often activate fear in the system. And then with fear, obviously fear comes up into the mind, and the mind starts creating scenarios of this could happen, that could happen, and then fear starts to escalate. And so when things like that happen, when we get that activation, I think one of the best things we can do is just step back, steady yourself, take a couple of breaths, and just to come back. And that helps to kind of get out of that noise that's up there and just to kind of maybe come back down into the body and say, okay, hang on a second. Because, sometimes that noise pulls us into the entanglement of somebody else's field as well, and to just kind of, so we always separate and keep what's ours so that we're not getting overwhelmed by, excess that's not ours, we'll say.
Yeah, that is such a great point. Talking about being really aware of the energies that you allow in, what's new, what's yours and what's not yours, and especially with integration. And once that you come back from an experience that is quite intense or really kind of transformative and very profound, to just be really careful about what you allow into your sphere, into your field, and really being aware of not taking on energy that is not yours, and being aware of what's yours and what's not. Because I think another thing that plant medicine can be really helpful with, and integration with it, is to really find your boundaries so that you can come out of it in a way that you feel stronger, also because you're not taking on what's not yours. So yeah. And now I'm thinking about going back to your work and what you do. I'd like to hear a little bit more about your mystery school and what you're offering.
So I've kind of, yeah, well, I'm kind of in a bit of another intermediary kind of a transformational stage at the moment, which I think everybody is anyway, because that's where we're at in the shift in consciousness. But like I stopped working with plant medicines about just maybe about a year and a half ago, I think. And it's just it's just been pushed forward to kind of embrace what I do a little bit deeper, kind of to step out from behind the medicine, like just in my own personal journey. And so one of the things that I have is I've launched an ancient mystery school revival. And this was guided to this about, it was 7 years work just to get myself ready to be able to bring it. And I've been kind of have that going. So it's a 12-month commitment. So it's a Temple of Thoth, and it's an ancient mystery school. And I run it obviously in modern times, but very much like the way the ancient mystery schools were. I kind of found an issue with some of the modern mystery school revivals out there, and not a diss at them at all, but I just find a lot of them are very much focused on the information and not so much about the actual embodiment of it as a guidance. So the mystery school I have is basically, it's a 12-month commitment, because the 12 months is to commit to the space so that it can keep the container right, because obviously it's quite intense to hold a space over 12 months, and it is 24/7. And so what it is it obviously it's a consciousness school basically. And I'm kind of cautious of the word school because words are so diluted in the modern world from what they were kind of understood to be. So yes, it is a school that you learn, and I teach like all the ancient modalities. So like you're talking about Hermeticism, your Kabbalah, occult wisdom, alchemy, you're going to tarot, symbolism, philosophy. And with philosophy, I suppose I don't mean studying philosophers, but people developing the mind for their own philosophy, which is a way of understanding and getting the mind to open in multiple quantum levels, so that we're not just thinking linear, but we can multiple perspective anything that happens. And it's a good way of looking at symbols as well. So that's kind of like comes through in the teaching part of it, but it is a sacred space and you're guided. So like it's a healing space, And because of the cycles of consciousness that I can attune to and that I am attuned to, I know when things are moving. So, people have this misconception about like the word mystic, because we have a modern understanding of the word mystic for a lot of people in general, and they think like Mystic Meg, and it's, if it's a crystal ball and you're going to look at the future and things like that. And that is a kind of like a byproduct of being a mystic, I suppose you could say. Because what happens is, as the body is more sensitized, and we're talking about the information of the mind as it expands, and then the sensitivity of the body expands, it means that you're reading further and further out there into the conscious fields. And so I'm aware of things before they happen because I can feel the energy. I know what's coming, and I watch patterns because patterns are symbolic. So I'll see patterns everywhere I go. I'll feel patterns in my body. I'll feel energy moving. And so, as well as it being a school of the teaching of these modalities and really bringing them in deeply, and I really good simplified analogies of way that I explain all these things, but you're also getting a guidance. And so what the school does is a companion to your life. So you get daily content that's going to guide you through the energy of that week, of that day. You also get weekly, you get monthly, and obviously over the year. So as well as you're being taught the modalities, how you're being taught the modalities is in relation to what you're going through on any given day or given week, which means that in the 12-month space, as life happens to us all, as it does in 12 months, and life is up and down, as we know, because it has a pendulum swing. But what happens is, in this school, is you're seizing every opportunity of that 12 months. So things that would happen in people's day-to-day lives that they probably take no notice of, because obviously I'm attuned to simply in the conscious fields, I'm able to guide people through what that means for them, so that they can actually navigate these events in their life much deeper, and so expand their consciousness at phenomenal levels. Because we have things in life that people take no notice of at all. And again, if I just go back to the diagram, is because people just think down here, people make the decisions off the material plane because that's just what they're aware of. But for me, I'll get people making decisions of what's happening on the material plane, but by what it means all the way up here. And so it means that people can really navigate things in their life and take the information that they're actually receiving from consciousness to really go deeper into themselves and expand outside that material plane, so that they start to read their own lives now at much deeper levels. Like, I also do rituals in there as well. Like, I'll run rituals whenever, like, if I'm guided to do a ritual, I'll hold rituals as well, because for me, in the space of 12 months, it's getting people ready for what would be considered like a first level initiation. And when I'm talking about initiation, I'm talking about the level of like masters of wisdom. That's the kind of the path that I'm on myself. And these are not like, these are macro initiations. These are really large initiations. And so obviously, before anybody's ready for initiation, you have to be able to expand your consciousness to be able to start to be in a place to be able to ready to receive that, which is really moving away from the fixation on the material plane. Obviously, we're all physical beings, are operating our consciousness in a physical body. So you are obviously going to be operating your physical body, but with the understanding much beyond the physical plane, you're actually navigating your life much deeper, which means that you'll make much more progress in a much shorter space of time. So it's, in a nutshell, kind of that. But obviously there's so much more that I kind of can't even describe in words as to what it is. But I bring in all those ancient modalities, because like, I would work from the guidance of the ascended masters. Like Master Gatsumi now is my main guide, who guides me through with anything that needs to be brought at any given time, and for what humanity needs because of what we're moving into. Like, we've just bridged into this new aeon of consciousness. And I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here, if that's all right, just to explain this about the cycles of consciousness. What we consider time is a man-made construct because of the limited bandwidth of the human mind. And so time is a cycle of consciousness. The earth around the sun is 365 days, but that's just a cycle of consciousness if you really want to look at it, consciousness. But there's many other planes, or everything is consciousness. So we have the age of Aquarius that a lot of people are talking about now, which is a 2,200 year cycle. Well, it's actually a 26,000 year cycle, but each sign of the zodiac in that the great years, it's known as, has about 2,200 years in each sign. And so we're just bridging from age of Pisces into age of Aquarius now. And so that's a death process to make way for a rebirth. So that's really impactful at the moment. But if we go up again, there's many cycles at play. We also have the end of a Kali Yuga, which is a 432,000 year cycle happening at the same time, which is putting in extra heft right now, which is why the intensity out there. we're also moving from, as a collective human race, of the fourth root race of humans, we're moving into the fifth root race of humans, which is a more spiritually based, which is why matter is collapsing. And that's a cycle that lasts hundreds of millions of years. That's also happening right now. So there's a really intense transition that's happening in the collective field at the moment, more intense than it has ever been for a long, long time, for hundreds of thousands and even millions of years. And that's the intensity that we're feeling. So the school for me was guided to be brought. As I said, I had 7 years of work from just on myself to be able to bring the school, but it's to get people ready to be able to start embodying this new level of consciousness. Because for humanity to embrace a new level of consciousness where we're going, it takes pioneers. People have to start to go there first to show other people what that looks like. And so the school is to really bring in that wisdom to get people ready to start embodying this consciousness. And it's not just about people holding space, even though it is. If you're holding space, you're going to be able to hold a profound space from the information and the expansion that you're going to get. But the embodiment of consciousness is everybody. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter if you're a teacher or a bin man or a shopkeeper. It's how you show up in the world. It's that's the embodiment of consciousness. So it's vital for humanity in this transition to get there. And so that's really the backbone of the intention of the school, I suppose. So a bit of a mix of what's in the school and its overall intention as well.
And it sounds amazing. It's like music to my ears because what you're talking about to me it's all about integration. So it's about integrating these different ancient teachings into a program, and then it's about people integrating those teachings within their lives, into their lives. So it sounds really, really interesting. And I'm curious to know, how do you see your work developing? This is what you're offering right now, so I'm just curious to know how you're seeing your work developing in the future, and also what you feel that you're picking up in the conscious field for yourself and potentially for others too, something that's coming up.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose just in relation to my own work, like as I said, since moving away from like holding space with plant medicines, like
Mhm.
obviously I've been guided more into my own work, and I worked like as a ceremonial magician as well, like which is again, people hear these terms, don't fixate on the words, what you might be programmed to understanding those words. But like a ceremonial magician is somebody who can manipulate energy. And I'm saying manipulate, but not in negative, which most people will think of. Manipulate, if you just take a dictionary explanation, is just it's just the transmutation of energy. It's wielding energy to do what it's supposed to do, basically. And so I've stepped a lot more into that now. And so the ceremonies that I do now at the moment are really kind of like ceremonial magic, basically. So what I'm doing is I'm, again, like say with people in a space, again, I get them up onto the astral plane. I work with the astral plane a lot. It's kind of there, a lot. I do a lot of work there. So I kind of get people up there, because it's an emotional expression of once you get people onto the astral plane. And then I will find in each person, again, I will go back to this, and I'll find where the imbalances are consciously as to why things show up in their material physical life with difficulties. And so I'll feel into them and I'll see exactly where consciousness is misaligned. And I suppose, just to be clear for people who maybe might have a misunderstanding about working as a ceremonial magician, is you're never going against the will of anything or anybody. You're letting divinity itself, the divine will, guide you what centralized is. So you are just basically a channel for the energy for it to come through. You don't ever push it away that maybe a person wants, even if they think they want it. You always go by the conscious field. So that's kind of where I'm at now at the moment with ceremonies anyway, is I'm working kind of that way. That's kind of just basically putting it into a very, very finite space to try to describe. But so yeah, just really connecting just deeply and directly to the conscious field, and then to allow that go directly for what somebody needs and what's ready for them at that time, to align it as well. So that's kind of one of the ceremonies I'm working with. A lot of courses as well, which I'm behind, and I have courses that I'm supposed to have, I'm way behind on, but it's just the way things are. So of course, like all kind of to do with understanding consciousness and a lot of these ancient modalities, because like the ancient and the sacred wisdom has gotten so watered down in modern times. I mean, it's just the natural course of how things go. You have a lot of, you have to be careful of the shadow of humanity. And I suppose this is why the way I work at such a depth is because I can see where humanity is going, because I can see that the cycles of consciousness, and I can see where we need to be. And obviously with the expressions that are in those conscious fields that we're moving into, there's certain things that can't exist anymore and that won't. It's a case of however long it takes humanity to get there. But so I kind of work at that level. So a lot of the courses I bring back a simple understanding of these ancient processes and wisdom, like even Hermeticism and things like that, because the watered down versions only tailor to the shadow of humanity, which is that quick fix. You know, we all want that. Humanity wants the quick fix, and that's not how it works, as we know. And the time that people waste looking for those quick fixes could have been spent really kind of making those momentums. And there's a lot of modern self-help books are just watered down versions of Hermeticism, basically. And they've kind of subset out certain laws and they've used them. And that's not how it works, because all laws are relative to each other. You can't single out one law because it doesn't operate on its own. It operates with all the others. And so I find a lot of the modern self-help books are really kind of shadow based, if I'm quite honest. So a lot of the teachings that I do is about getting the understandings of consciousness, understanding these fields through the ancient modalities, because the ancients had all this figured out already because of their own mystics in their own times, and the sages and the magi and the Brahmins. So the teaching side is all about those kind of topics that I'm kind of going into. I am launching an online weekly kind of a space that I'm going to do a donation based, probably in a few weeks. I was hoping to have it launched by now, but which is just going to be the wisdom of the masters. So basically, an open space for anybody to engage me with anything, whether it's dream interpretation or what's going on in their life, or they want to understand about consciousness or what's happening in humanity, and I can unfold that. And it's a way for just getting people engaged in, I suppose, what I do, but also that's coming from how the ascended masters kind of teach as well. But also then it'll give them an idea of how I work if they do want to go further, maybe to work with me one to one, or if they want to maybe interested in some of those courses. So at the moment, that's kind of where I'm at with my own stuff of what I'm doing. But yeah, I suppose just in relation to, as it maybe a tip for people, I think on the conscious fields, this year is going to be extremely intense with projection. This 2025, because what's happening, you see, is, and stop me now if I'm just going rambling here, but what's happening in this transit that I'm talking about, and just remember there's so many massive conscious transits that go way up celestially as well, which are an impact on our individual collective field, because we're all the one consciousness, we're just individualized parts of it. So everything is interrelated and we feel everything and everything affects us. So because of this shift that's happening, which is a death process and also a rebirth process at the same time, and so the old way has to collapse. And if you take about like the majority of the world, 99% are unconscious and have been unconscious, just like we're all still unconscious at many, many layers. And a lot of people haven't been aware of maybe the state of the world because they've been distracted, which is part of how things go. And you see, we're in Revelation now, and Revelation is not the end of the world. Revelation is just the great revealing, which happens at the end of a cycle before we begin, because we have to be able to become aware of what needs to die, what we need to allow to die, so that we can rebirth something new. And that revelation is now coming to the collective at that 99% level. And as they're starting to become more aware of the falsity that's been existent in the material plane, like the governments and the corruption, the media industry, the health industry, you know, all this corruption that's been revealed now. So people are coming to this mass awakening. I'm not great on that term, by the way, but they're coming to this mass awakening at the moment, which is obviously, as we know, anytime we come into a new process, the first thing we get is, projection and avoidance, because, we don't accept it yet, because we're not at that level yet to be able to accept it. But now that it's going to be the 99% are coming to that stage, that means that there's going to be a collective energy on top of the cycles ending and beginning that's going to be very projective and going to be very avoidant. So boundaries are going to be very, very important for people this year as the collective starts to, because they're going to navigate towards people with a bit more light who maybe have been doing this work for a bit longer. So I just think be very, very aware that that's what's going to be happening. And as well, to use that to have a little bit of compassion to other people who are coming to that stage as well, because we've all been there, and we also know how difficult it is. So just that's one thing that I do see coming throughout this year.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And as you said, awareness is the key. And regardless of how long you've been on this path and been doing this work, there's always areas of like growth and transformation. And sometimes I'm really aware that I've been really unaware. So it's just a process. And then compassion is the key. as you were saying. So, well, thank you for sharing all this with us. So tell us how people can find you online.
Yeah, so my website is peterkelly.online. It's quite outdated, I will be honest, and I do need to update. It's another one of the things that I need to get done. But yeah, peterkelly.online. But I think the best place you'd probably get me is on Instagram, which is at subconsciously.conscious, which is a bit of a mouthful, but that's probably the best place to get me. You also get me on Facebook just under my own name as well as Peter Kelly. I have a YouTube channel as well, which is under Subconsciously Conscious, but I'm hoping to kind of get that more active as well as I kind of go forward. But Instagram is probably the best place, which is at subconsciously.conscious, and then the website, which is peterkelly.online.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Peter,
Thank
for
you.
joining us. Thank you, everyone, and I will see you in the next episode. Thanks for joining us today on the Psychedelic Integration Compass. If you enjoyed the episode, remember to like the video and subscribe to the newsletter to stay updated on what's coming next. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.